sugar, spice, and everything nice. These were the ingredients chosen to create the perfect little girl. But Professor Utonium accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction, Chemical X. Thus, the Powerpuff Girls were born!
We're back in the most daunting mod in Factorio, and it's time to start on the next science pack. I appreciate the support on the other videos, despite my extended hiatus, but I'm ready to get back into it. Unfortunately, my microphone was off for the first half or so of the footage, so I kinda had to guess what I was doing in-game while making the script. Hope you guys enjoy it anyways, and let's get on with it. When we left off in the last video, I had just finished crafting my first ever circuits. Of course, I was overjoyed at this monumentous achievement, but the machine had to be fed by hand. I decided my first order of business would be to fully automate circuit production, which should be fairly easy with splitters being available now. Of course, before I could get splitters, I had to research logistics, which also has alloy smelting as a prerequisite. I set up a temporary hand-fed science machine, and I waited for the researchers to finish. While I was waiting, I decided to put wood on the bus for when I would have to automate science production. I then went and made some new glassworks facilities and put glass on the bus as well. In order to fit glass in the main bus, I went ahead and deconstructed my temporary circuit maker. I also brought up a line of coke, the coal kind. After an agonizingly long time of restocking the science maker and waiting, logistics was finally done researching. Immediately, I dismantled the science machine and celebrated the long-awaited splitter. I then got to work by splitting the coke and wood over to the circuits and main bus respectively. I then spent some time designing as efficient of an automated circuit setup as I could. I also had to automate graphite, ceramic, and cellulose. Ceramic and graphite were easy and inexpensive, but the cellulose would be annoying if I needed a lot of it. The recipe isn't all that costly, but it takes an excruciating amount of time. Luckily, circuits don't need all that much of it, but I'll have to find better ways of making it in the future. I was able to get all the main ingredients for circuits hooked up to the bus, and all I needed to do was bring a pipe of saline water over for the batteries. This was done in no time, and soon circuits were automated. I decided to let the circuits back up in the machine without putting to a belt or chest or anything for two reasons. One, I didn't need that many circuits at a time at this point, and two, I didn't want my factory to go up in flames when trying to make more than like 20 of them at a time. The next thing I decided to set my sights on was automated science pack production, which at this point was long overdue. I started with this weird vertical design, but then I opted for a more traditional horizontal approach and ended up with exactly 60 science per minute. At this point, I began to utilize my to-do list mod and log any issues that I come across to then deal with whenever I feel like it. I noted that I needed to expand to a new iron patch soon because I was quickly running out of ore. This will be important later, just wait. For the meantime, I just disconnected my iron ore from my steel production because I didn't need very much steel at the moment, and rearranged some of the mining drills for maximum efficiency. This helped, but my iron was still severely lacking. Then I noticed that my zinc wasn't being produced anymore, and I found out that the mining drills were backed up with ash. Maybe I should do something to stop that from happening. I'll just leave it. With syngas done researching, I decided to mix some using coal gas and water to use as fuel for my glassworks. I had previously been using gasoline, which I wasn't producing nearly enough of to be viable. Then I made another one for good measure. I sort of just walked around my base for the next 15 minutes, tweaking things here and there, and eventually I noticed that my wood setup was way too small, and that I would need a much bigger one to account for science production. I decided to build it way at the top of my base. Unsurprisingly, I had to spend an insane amount of time waiting for trees to be made in a botanical nursery so that I could actually start up the farms. When it was done, however, I was making triple the amount of wood I was before. After that, I added duralumin to the to-do list, which would also require aluminum mining. While doing all this stuff, I'd queued all the researchers required for the next science pack, and they were just running in the background. I'll talk more about what the science pack actually needs in the next episode, but one of the biggest stepping stones is vrock farming. Vrocks are these weird bug guys that are probably the simplest animals to handle in the mod. I'll get back to them later on, but for the next 8 hours of gameplay, I needed to get my factory's infrastructure ready for them and the science pack itself. For now though, I just went around my base and continued to fix minor issues. For example, I allowed my steam boilers to output their ash automatically, fixed my iron oxide buildup from coal processing, and redesigned my iron and copper furnace stacks for maximum efficiency. While doing so, I disconnected my iron ore from my furnaces so that I could expand to a new patch. This proved to be a mistake since, as it turns out, literally everything takes iron. Then I began the arduous process of belting over to the new iron patch, which just so happened to be a light year away. The belt was nowhere near complete, but I went ahead and blueprinted the mining drills, and thankfully I used a design where the ash is outputted to a chest. Not so thankfully, I then decided to take a break from the world for a while. When I got on several days later, I had completely forgotten about my iron issue and began playing the game like nothing was wrong. Now, let's get some pipes, right? Let's get some pipes. I then came across my incomplete iron ore belt and was enlightened of my mistake. Okay, let's see what this is. What's going on here? What is this? Looks like it's coal and iron. Oh, yeah. Are we just out of iron? Wait, hold on. Yeah, we're just out of iron. Thus began the dark ages of my factory. I had to make belts to bring the iron up, but how could I make belts with no iron? I had to pinch my pennies and scavenge around the base for chests that I had lazily thrown excess iron into. Oh, look at that. This thing is so dry on iron, it started making ash for me. I don't know how it keeps refilling. I don't know where it's getting all these. I spent around an hour gathering materials and building and waiting for belts to craft in my inventory. Eventually, I had fully constructed the first of the 2 belts, meaning iron was being smelted at last. Now, it was much easier to make the remaining belts and finish the project. But even this wasn't enough for me, and I looked into iron ore processing to increase the yield. All I would need to do is run iron ore through a jaw crusher. Jaw crushers need a lot of steel to craft. Easy enough, let me just grab some. No way! Where'd my coke go? All my coke. I'm about to pitch a fit, guys. I'm about to pitch... Ooh, man. After connecting the coke back to the steel, I noticed how mind-numbingly slow they produce. I needed 30 steel for each of my jaw crushers, so I decided to double my steel production. I call that successful, dude. It was still connected to my old iron patch, so I knew it would quickly run out, but I didn't care right now, so I ignored it. Now I could make the jaw crushers and process one of my iron belts. I decided to do the other one later. The processed iron was almost a 2 times increase on production, so I was very pleased. It has a stone byproduct, so I turned it into saline water and then voided it. The next thing on my agenda was to overhaul my acetylene production. I wanted to use it as my main liquid fuel for duralumin smelting, and I needed it to mine titanium, which I needed to craft tons of machines in the future. I explained the coke-eating monstrosity that is the acetylene recipe last episode, and now I was going to make 8 times as much. Luckily, as long as my coke and tar processing are running smoothly, my base can support it. All I needed to do was account for the slacked lime byproduct, and it was finished. Now we've got a sinkhole I can dump my slacked lime into. And then acetylene is done. Next, I got to work and started titanium mining. Titanium ore has a 200% mining time, meaning I'll need twice the mining drills to be as efficient as any other ore. Now that I have a wealth of acetylene, that shouldn't be an issue. I blueprinted a belt over to a new furnace stack and got to work. With the deluge of iron now in hand, the task of making the hundreds of pipes and conveyor belts needed was trivial at best. Oh, man, sorry. Stretched really hard. It was done in no time and the titanium was dumped in a chest. With titanium, I could finally craft a smelter. Duralumin is close at hand. I forgot to press record, but I began aluminum mining. All it takes is coal gas, so it was easy. I then brought titanium and aluminum up to the bus and split some aluminum and copper over to the smelter. I ratted my acetylene over and duralumin started being produced. And boom. First piece of duralumin, everyone. You're witnessing history. The reason I needed duralumin in the first place is for a building called a gene lab, where I would need to make moss gene samples, which I'll get to later. However, I was making duralumin at a speed of around 1 every 4 seconds. I needed around 80 for a gene lab. I just decided to deal with it. Since I had time to spare, I went around my base fixing any setups that had ash as a byproduct and allowing them to auto-export it. Once the next science pack is complete, I can route the ash to burners where it's voided entirely. Then I built the rest of the jaw crushers and hooked the processed iron up to the furnaces. Moss gene samples need petri dishes, and, you guessed it, moss. I decided to go ahead and get a head start on it and automate petri dishes and bring them up to where I'll make the samples. However, I guess I'm blind because I missed that I already had a perfectly functional glassworks making petri dishes literally right below me. Before I could finally make the gene lab, I needed to make some plastic. Luckily, I had already made a biofactory as it's one of the gene lab's ingredients. I just mixed aromatics with syngas and the plastic was made. Oh, we got it. I crafted the gene lab at last and set up the Sample Maker 3000. First, I had to make agar with seaweed and steam. The agar then goes into an empty petri dish, and then is combined with moss in the gene lab to make the samples. In order to create my first Vrox, I'll need a Vrock codex, generic Earth DNA samples, moss gene samples, petri dishes, and native flora. I decided to turn my attention to the DNA samples since everything else is pretty easy to get. They need biosamples, which take a biocontainer and some native flora, some science packs, and a chest. I decided to go ahead and automate the biocontainers, which required steel, meaning I would need to bring up a belt. I then built it over some titanium, glass, and lead, and they were done. I was messing around with the Sample Maker 3000, and I noticed something that made me sick to my stomach. Okay. Oh crap. Oh no. No more messing around. I decided to go to a coal patch a few gigaparsecs away, and dedicate as much space as I needed to bash any power problem I have into the ground. Honestly, I didn't build all that much for now, but it solved the issue. Yes, 53 megawatts. Whew. Eventually, I got back to work and made an incubator and a creature chamber. The incubator was to make the biosamples with my containers I made earlier, and the creature chamber is where I would actually create my Vrock children. Then, I realized I would need a machine called a data array for the DNA samples, so I made one of those too. After a little bit of waiting, I finally have all the ingredients to life. I popped them in my creature chamber, and a rock was created. Here it goes. 400 seconds. Come here. Bring it to me. Oh! Now that life had been created, it was time to do what any good capitalist would do in this situation, and mass breed them for monetary gain. Of course, before I could breed them, I needed 2, so while waiting for that, I looked at what I would actually need to house these bugs. I would need a few Vrock paddocks and an absolutely massive machine called a reproductive complex. The reproductive complex only needs 2 Vrocks, and makes Vrock cocoons with sap, water barrels, and moss. Then, the cocoons go to paddocks, which hold up to 10 Vrocks, and give in native flora, more water barrels, and more moss, and then Vrocks are spit out. The more Vrocks you have in a machine, the faster it goes. These buildings, especially the reproductive complex, are super expensive and take hundreds of plates. I decided to double my Duralumin setup and make a quick concrete setup as well, since those are ingredients. I'd been wanting to make a permanent concrete build for a while now, since it also gives a 250% movement speed increase, which was super useful. I also went ahead and constructed the moss farms, and finally made the reproductive whatever. I then went and made a chest full of barrels as preparation for the Vrocks. I would have to first make the cocoons in the complex to start the process, so when the barrels were done, I made a barreling machine to fill them with water. I then put all the ingredients in manually and started it up. I decided to make a stockpile of cocoons for when I wanted to start up the paddocks. It would take around 10 seconds for each cocoon, and every rock required around 5 cocoons. I went ahead and made another reproductive complex, but it wouldn't matter. I realized that, because I only had 2 Vrocks in the paddock, it would take around 20 minutes for any to be made. I didn't let this dissuade me though. I spent that time fixing parts of my base and talking with you guys on stream. I also replaced almost every bit of stone bricks I had with concrete. Then, I realized I'd be needing lots of nickel way in the future for intermetallics, a huge ingredient in trains, so I went ahead and set up nickel mining. I hooked it up to a furnace stack and started getting a little bit. I got back on later that day to set up my design for automating Vrock production. It had been around an hour at this point, and I had 14 of them. I made some sap extractors, brought the native flora up, and populated the belts with barrels, and it was complete. These are my pets. Stay tuned for next episode where I slaughter them all for science. This is where I decided to end it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and once again, thank you for sticking with me. If you made it this far in the video, comment Pyanodon? More like Pyanodon. Alright, bye.